All right, if everyone can have a seat, settle in. We'll get going here in a second. Hutch, I think you jinxed me. I think you jinxed me on the IT side. All right, no, you're good. You're fine. All right. Hang on 1 second. It's not this. It's the. All right, let's get going. I'm sorting out a couple IT issues here. We'll get it. A couple announcements. Again, if you struggle on the exam, please find me if you haven't already to have a chat. Thanks to those who've already reached out. Most of you did great. Assignment 2 is posted, and we're going to talk about it here briefly. It will be due next Friday, so not Friday. So you have almost 2 weeks to do it. If you have travel, if you have a club, you have an interview, that's not really a good excuse, guys. You have almost 2 weeks to do it, so please get it done. My advice, read all the instructions carefully, but we'll talk about it here in a second, all right? What else? Wednesday, we've got our – still doing it to me. Hang on 1 sec. All right. Wednesday, we've got our NIL panel coming in. Hang on 1 sec. Hang on 1 sec. All right. Why is this doing this? Is there any? Why is this giving me the 2 screen options here, guys? Anybody know? All right. Let me just try this for now. All right. And then I'm going to go. All right. Okay. So we got the NIL panel coming in. All right, talk to me. All right. Okay, what else? We're grading your outlines right now. We will put some additional resources out there for your final exams. Again, if you have more questions, many of you came to me about finding experts for your documentaries. But they should be done hopefully this week on the outlines-ish. We'll reach out to you with questions, okay? A quick daily. Hopefully it's still sitting there, Karina. According to women's head hockey coach Jenna Trubiano, what's an important way that you can support their quest for varsity status? Is it nothing? It'll work itself out, man. Should you play hockey? Or should you make your voice heard? Write U of M Athletics, ping Ward, use social media, tell your friends, and support their cause. Or boycott the men's hockey program. And again, emails, if you have technical issues, come find me or Karina in person at some point after this class if you have an issue, okay? Karina? All right. Everybody good? Okay. A quick review, guys, on hoops history. Which tournament preceded the NCAA tournament? By the way, please put your devices away if they're still out, including phones. Which tournament preceded the NCAA tournament? Anybody? Yeah. The NIT. Yep. Something we're about to be real familiar with. Haha. Okay. What were the NCAA's early concerns about holding the tournament? Why did they hold off? Go ahead. Yeah, money. They were concerned. They thought this was a losing venture. We don't want any part of it. Who organized that first tournament, by the way, that first NIT tournament? It's important. Go ahead. Yeah, a bunch of New York City sports writers organized it, right? So it wasn't like a body. Great. By the way, the first women's tournaments, the AIAW, really the predecessor to the NCAA in 1972, which was a important date in history, which we'll talk about today. In 1982 was the first NCAA women's tournament. UConn won the first one, okay? All right. Slowly, the NCAA tournament grew. Slowly in the number of teams. You guys should remember that, and as well as the money involved, okay? The TV rights started to grow with that. And then what happened in 1979 that launched the popularity of basketball in general? What was that big event that we talked about, and who was involved? Anybody? Got to know this one. Yeah. Yeah, it was an iconic matchup between these two guys. By the way, does anyone know anyone who went to high school with Irvin Magic Johnson? I do. She's sitting right here. How about that? All right. Hockey. The 20-something coach of this school effectively rallied support for a hockey tournament, for a men's hockey tournament. Which school? It's a good hint. You're real close to it right now. Michigan, yeah. Michigan. He rallied the tournament. He got tournaments together by rallying everybody. All right, what 20-something coach for Michigan's women's hockey program is actively trying to gain varsity status? Hopefully you guys all know that one. She was here last week. That's Jenna Tribbiano, coincidentally. What did Coach Tribbiano say was the biggest factor when I pinned her down on it of getting varsity status in her mind? What was the first thing she mentioned? Yeah, money. Yes, if $100 million showed up suddenly, we probably wouldn't be having a conversation about whether we should have a women's varsity sport, right? There are a lot of other factors, but money is a big one. Where did they play the first men's hockey tournament? Do you guys remember for those first several years? It's kind of an odd place. Yeah. Colorado, yeah, specifically Colorado Springs at a resort, kind of used it as a marketing tool. It's kind of weird. How did Michigan do, by the way, in the first one and the first 10? Yeah, won 6 out of 10 and won the first one. Did very well, right? Finally, Title IX. What is the name? I want you to remember this person. What is the name of the head of UM's DPEW? She's really that influential person early on in women's athletics here at Michigan. Does everyone remember her name? Very good. Margaret Bell. Yep. And she has a mixed legacy. Why? Why does Margaret Bell have a mixed legacy here? Talked about her a little bit. I'll share that. She was a supporter of women's athletic endeavors up to a point, up to the point of competition, of team sports. Wasn't good for women. Girls should be girls, right? Those are the kind of refrains we heard. Bad for your reproductive system, by the way, which was something has been heard in my sorry, guys. I'm getting the two. Yeah, and it's yeah. Can you? Thank you, Kaza. What did? Hold on. having a day. Woo! Okay, there we go. Thank you so much. Okay. Awesome. Similar to many schools, did Michigan act quickly or were they slow in adopting women's sports? Anybody? Okay, I'm not going to steal Hutch's thunder. I'll keep moving. What prompted U of M to move? It was a lawsuit, okay, in Ann Arbor, and probably not like a lot of places. Okay, who can name the first 6 women's sports at Michigan? Dun, dun, dun. Who can name one of them? Go ahead. Synchronized swimming. That's the hard one. Tennis, yep. Field hockey, you got it. Basketball. Volleyball, I believe. And I think the other one is... Oh. All right. Very good. Okay. By the way, what was softball's first season? Now that Coach Hutchins, does anybody know that? Audrey, do you know the first season? Do you have to count back? What team number were we on? I believe it was 1978, the season. I assume it was proved in 77. All right, quickly on assignment number 2. It's due the March 24th. Again, you had a bad Thursday. You have travel. You have an interview. You have a club thing. I'm a senior. I don't care that much. Not good excuses, okay? This is not a huge effort. I want you to profile somebody, some person in the U of M Hall of Honor. It's the Hall of Fame for Michigan athletes, administrators, and coaches, okay? The assignment's available on Canvas. There are 5 simple questions similar to the Michigan Daily. I want you to go out and use some of the resources that the Bentley Library offers, including the Daily, including their image bank, right? Find a photo of this person. Find an article about this person and talk about it, okay? If you pick a female athlete, there's a bonus. If you post on social media and do a screenshot of that post and use hashtag Title IX, because we're just coming out of the 50th anniversary Title IX, you can earn 5 bonus points, okay? That's all in the assignment. Read it carefully, and I'm going to ask you so everyone here doesn't pick Hutch or Charles Woodson, okay? You need to pick someone. You're not in it? Wow. Is it because he just retired? That's true. Plus 3 letters of your last name, so plus or minus, okay? And if you don't have anybody, use your judgment, okay? But use someone, pick someone within the range of your last name in this assignment, okay? Follow the instructions. They're all out there. Here are links to those resources. They are also in the assignment. There is a rubric in the assignment, okay? Where to find it? It's in Canvas under today's module if you want to see it. Technically, it's a quiz because of the format of the thing. But hopefully everything will be out there for you. And again, if you pick a female athlete or an administrator or coach who's in the Hall of Honor and you tweet it out, you can earn extra points. Any questions on this? All right. And we'll maybe do a refresher on it next time. And again, a tip, read all the instructions. Read all the instructions. It's a pretty straightforward assignment, okay? And good luck. And you have almost 2 weeks. All right. A few speaker reminders. Please have your devices away. We are off the record. Stay in class. And post-class, Hutch, if they want to come up and say hi, you able to stick around a little bit? Cool. Awesome. Coach Hutch needs no introduction. She is the all-time winningest coach in softball history. She's a living legend here on campus. I know she can't walk out of a restaurant with people yelling at her for a photo. I've seen that happen. She is from Lansing, multiple degrees. Degree from MSU in Indiana. Famously retired last season. 2005 NCAA champion, 22-time Big Ten champ, 18-time Coach of the Year in the conference, multiple Halls of Fame, widely sought after for speaking engagements and such. Passions, one of her passions, the Michigan Softball Academy, which I participated in the last several years. It's an event to raise money for breast cancer. One of the coolest charity events, and you get my age, this is the kind of thing you do, that I've ever been a part of. And it's awesome. So she's going to tell her story, a little bit about Title IX, and a lot more. And it's an awesome, awesome story. And again, my promise to you, look, you guys I can sit up here and lecture about all these things, but if there's somebody who has a story or firsthand knowledge or more and lived through some of the history that we talk about this class, my promise to you is to work to get them in, and this is that case. By the way, here's the big guy in action. Look at that. I think I fell over after. I'm kind of leaning this way. I don't know how my form is. By the way, way harder than it looks to throw that ball like that, just so you know. And there's me and Hutch. So without further ado, as I pull up her presentation, can I get a huge round of applause for Coach Carol Hutchins?
Hello? Can you hear me?
You're live, and that clicks it forward. And
this goes forward?
Yep. This one will go you forward, and it should play. And if it doesn't,
I'm sorry, the right one?
yeah, the right one will take you forward.
And the left one goes
It should also
back?
play on a second click.
Okay, I got a couple of those. Oh, I got my notes up here. Awesome. How's everybody today? You guys need to take a lap before we start? How about this is softball season and baseball season? Any baseball guys in here? We have how many softball in here? It's a hard time of year, I can tell you that. You have to be tough, and only the tough go to Michigan. Everybody else goes somewhere warm. I did retire from coaching, but I didn't retire from life, as I like to tell people. And the one thing that I have always been passionate about are women in sport, because honestly, that's all I ever wanted to do. So before I begin, the first thing I want to ask this group, male or female, how many of you played athletics at some point in your life? High school, junior high? Right. And how many of you now play in college? How many athletes do we have in here? Awesome. It's so weak. Sorry. Right, give it to me. So let me ask you this. And in your lifetime, you've really only ever known that the girls get to play just like the boys get to play, right? And as I'm going to talk about this legislation, I want you to look up there and read it for a moment if you've never seen the 37 words, which I, a few years ago, was talking to a group of my players before your time. And I don't know what the context of our conversation was, but I've always liked to consider myself an educator. I actually majored in education, and all I ever wanted to be was a teacher and a coach. And that's really what we do in athletics. We educate our players, and we use a different vehicle than the stuff he does, which is books and all that stuff. We use bats, balls, footballs, basketballs, but we're still teaching life, the life lessons that we take for wherever we go. To me, it's the greatest honor, and it's why athletics gets to be a part of education. Otherwise, we'd just be club sports like they are Club Manchester and Club all those other places in Australia. But you're part of the educational process when you're an athlete. But I'm going to delve into this a little bit further, because how many of you have moms, cousins, aunts, sisters who went to college and are professionals in the professional world of some type? How many of you know people like that? Right. So part of this history, which it might be interesting to some of you, and I can remember when I was your age, I didn't give a shit about history. It's boring. But as you get older, you recognize that understanding where we've been helps dictate where we go. And really just understanding what the world's about just helps you be educated, knowledgeable, and knowledge is an important part of your repertoire. So I'm going to talk about what's the one thing missing from this legislation? What is not in that 37 words? Yes. Athletics. There's not one thing that says anything about sport. Because this is not an athletics legislation. It was part of an educational amendment, which quite honestly was packaged like they do in Congress. And really, I don't know what the hell they do in Congress. But when they want stuff to go through, they stick it in all these other bills so they slide by, because who wants to read a bill that's, honestly, they're like 1,000 pages long. And it was actually snuck in, because as I think about it, I'm like, well, who would have voted for us to not be able to discriminate when we want to? That's really what that says. But it was snuck into the legislation, and it was because women were underrepresented in all areas of education. Less than 30% of women went to college. And I'm going to talk about when I went to college, which might seem a long time to you guys, but it's not a lifetime ago. Women, I didn't have any friends that were engineers or part of the stem cells. We were either in education or nursing. Those were really the only two things women did. But less than 30% of women were in education. Less than 10% of college faculty was women. And somewhere along the line, we've recognized that women were missing out on this opportunity, which has turned into one of the biggest societal changes since the 1965 civil rights legislation. Because how many guys, you guys ever watch Mad Men? Okay, that's an assignment. Mad Men, right? It's out of the 50s. And it's all about everybody they wear suits and ties, white men run America, and women are housewives. And any of the women in there that goes through some of the dramas and all the sexism, the sexual harassment, it's unreal. And it's history. Because when I grew up, that's how it was. All the men went to work, and the mom stayed home and took care of the kids and had the kids. And you didn't see women that were out getting out in the world. And I'm not here to say you shouldn't be a housewife and have kids and raise them. It's one of the toughest jobs in the world. But the opportunities and the influx of women into what we now see in society is because of this legislation. But along the way, we realized women were really being denied an opportunity in athletics for all the reasons I just cited. So it's an educational amendment. These are things that might be on the test, just saying, okay? I haven't taken a test for a long time. All right, less than 30% students, less than 10% of female representation, and it's not athletics. It just morphed into that. All right, if I press it again, she'll talk?
I think so. What I would like to see is where everyone is treated the same.
We don't lead just for women or just for certain women. Why wouldn't you want the best for your daughter and your son and whatever gender they are, all genders?
To continue this legacy backed by the support of the women who've come before us and who will come after us. This is part of a movement, and it's part of a history of women standing by each other.
Sometimes some reporter will say to me, "Who are you passing your torch to?" I'm using my torch to light other torches. Unless each one of us has a torch, we don't know where the we're going. I mean,
I know, I'm going to guess, does anybody in this room know who Gloria Steinem is? Excellent. She is one of the advocates and activists back in the 70s, back when they talk about women burning their bras and the revolution of the women. And she was one of the activists. And she's talking about the fact that we're trying to educate others so we can know where we're going. It was my favorite quote. I had to take it. So here's a little bit of history that you probably don't know about, all right? Audrey does, because I've done this presentation for student athletes. Before 1971, and in 1971, I was in 9th going into 10th grade, and that's when my parents divorced. We had 6 kids in our family, 6 kids in 6 years. That's a different section, all right? So I didn't realize my mom couldn't get a credit card because only your male spouse could co-sign, and then that's the only way women could get a credit card. How many of you guys have a credit card? No kidding. You could be fired for being pregnant. There wasn't an anti-pregnancy discrimination. Let's see if I have that date. That was in 1978 that we decided that we wouldn't discriminate against pregnant women. And for those of you who think there's no freaking way, I met a woman once. She married a guy who went to law school here, and I can't remember if she went to law school. And they got married when they were on campus. She worked in the library, and she got pregnant. She was pregnant with a person who became a longtime friend of mine. And In the library, she wore her overcoat every day until at some point it was just obvious. And then they said, you can't work here anymore. Women couldn't serve on a jury, and the rationale was women could not withstand that kind of stress or duress or whatever you want to call it of being in the same courtroom with the criminals. Women wouldn't be able to, tolerate that. Obviously, we couldn't fight on the front lines. We weren't allowed to go to war for our country. We could go as nurses and, Nurse Nightingale and those kind of things, but we couldn't serve in the armed forces. And with some very little exception, they couldn't even go to an Ivy League school. Women could not get in, although there's a little bit of conflicting evidence that maybe Princeton allowed some postdoctoral type of people or whatever. But in general. They also could not refuse to have sex with their husband. Spousal rape did not become something that was considered a criminal until 1993. We couldn't obtain birth control. In 1960, the actual birth control pill was approved, but it was still illegal in some states, and it could only be prescribed to married women. It was unavailable to unmarried women as of 1972. Sex discrimination in healthcare was not outlawed until 2010. Women were getting different prices for their healthcare than men. And sexual harassment. The first time a court recognized office sexual harassment was 1973. But the EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, didn't determine until 1980 that sexual harassment was a form of sex discrimination. The Mad Men, they were before 1980. You should watch it, it's quite interesting. And then only men could have any type of financial assistance to college. They had the GI Bill, which when I went to school and the Vietnam War was very fresh, tons of guys went to school and got to go to college. They had loans from the, free loans if I recall, and as they should have, but only men could get loans. Only men could get financial aid. Well, no wonder women didn't go to college. And to be honest, a lot of parents were like, well, I got to save my money and send my son to college. The daughter doesn't need to go to college. So this is just what the world was like in those days. And then this law turned it around. Oh, at Michigan, and this same woman who told me about her pregnancy talked about when she finally got to go on a date with her soon-to-be husband or, future husband, and they were going to a dance in the Union. And he took her to the Union, he walked her to the back door, he said, I'll meet you in the lobby. And she walked in the back door because women weren't allowed in the Union. They could only come in with a date, and they could only come in the back door. But we had the League, which was originally, is where the old, what's it called, the Waterman Gym? Waterman Gym. They had a place for women to have some exercise and so forth. And of course, I don't know what year we started having women be cheerleaders, but if you ever go to Homecoming, which is the greatest band event of the year, you see all the oldies are guys, all right? So women couldn't even be cheerleaders until I don't know when. So, before 1972, these are stats that come from, all the things I read. 1 in 27 girls played high school sports, about 300,000. 30,000 were NCAA college athletes, which I think is funny because we didn't have the NCAA. We only had the Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women. That was the governing body for any entities that were women. Okay? I'll talk about that in a little bit. Obviously, the stats I've already talked about. And less than 5% of women majored in any of the STEM fields. Largely, we were going to be educators. All right? Let's see. I'm going to go back to this. So I'm going to talk a little bit here about my story because, not because I think you'd be so interested in me, although I've had a pretty interesting life, but I paralleled the entire evolution. I was in high school in 1972. I was a sophomore in high school. And I grew up in Lansing, Michigan, and you can make fun of that all you want. All I wanted to do, I had 3 brothers and 2 sisters, and I was number 5 out of 6. I was the youngest girl, and all I did when I grew up was go outside and play whatever sport we were playing. We didn't have anything organized. But I played basketball. We shoveled off the driveway. But back then, March was a nicer month. I'm not going to lie. Climate change is real. I played football every afternoon in the fall. Went across the street. We played baseball with as many people as we could get. And it's myself and usually one other girl, my friend Joanne. And then we got to be, junior high age, that awkward age called teenager, I call it. And all of a sudden, I didn't get asked as much, It was getting to be kind of awkward. The boys had organized sports. My brothers played at the junior high level. They got to play varsity sports, and I was a cheerleader. Because that was the only thing we could do that was organized. Nothing against cheerleading. But we stayed after school, and we had what was called GAA, Girls Athletic Activities. And the gym teachers would organize. There were certainly a number of women who were our gym teachers that understood the value of competing, of playing, and of exercise. But we played in junior high, and then in high school. When I got to high school, it was the same thing. My brothers were playing varsity sports, and I got in the car with my gym teacher and our 5 other members of the basketball team, and we'd drive across to Lansing Sexton, East Lansing High School to play in what we called friendlies. We played 5 or 6 games a year. Basketball was my sport of choice, by the way. And we didn't have uniforms. We didn't have a schedule. Our coach, she didn't get paid. And it was just whoever wanted to volunteer and let us do some of these things. We wore what we call pennies. Does everybody know what a penny is? And we'd masking tape our numbers on. And I always say I was number 11. It's really easy to put 2 little ones on there. Mine would fall off with sweat. But that's the way it was. And for a number of those years in junior high, we played 6-person basketball. How many of you are familiar with 6-person basketball? The girls played 6-person basketball. That meant only one person, they called us the rover, could go on the other side of the court. So everybody had to stay on their side of the court, and the rover could go across the line. I took pride because I was the rover. I was the best athlete, I guess. But the theory back then was intense sport was not good for girls. And even our own Margaret Bell, who has the pool named after her, was only to a point supportive of women. It wasn't until the '84 Olympics, if I'm not mistaken, that was in LA, correct? Yeah. That was the first time the women ran in the marathon. They were denied the opportunity. If you've ever read the story of Catherine Switzer, she jumped in the Boston Marathon, and forgive me, I don't have the date, but it was in the late 70s or early 80s, and she jumped in as a man, tied her hair, put a cap on because she wanted to run in it. And she did really well, but at some point they figured out that there was a woman running in the marathon. The same thing. They thought our uteruses were going to fall out. That is literally why that's what people thought of us back then, that we were just fragile entities. All right? So in 1972, I didn't run home one day and say, wow, this law passed, I'm going to be an athlete now. That's not how it came down. I went home and probably didn't do my homework and took a nap like everybody. But everybody told me, Carol, my own mother said girls don't play sports. I could never understand why I didn't get to be an athlete like my brothers. And she said, girls just don't play sports. Girls aren't interested. Well, by my senior year at Everett, I went to Lansing Everett, and many of you know, there was a pretty famous guy there, Irvin Johnson. He was a couple years behind me. I used to shoot baskets with him in the gym. And he also went on to Michigan State like myself, and he had quite the notoriety, the career. He had all the opportunity, all right? But my senior year, the MHSAA, the Michigan High School Athletic Association, decided they were going to sponsor the first ever high school state basketball tournament for the girls. We were a varsity sport. Now, I never played high school softball. We didn't have it yet. It was just coming into existence. Everything we did was club. But we finally got to have a bus, have uniforms, have a real schedule. We had cheerleaders, and we played like 20-some games. And I know, it was the highlight of my life. I thought I had died and gone to heaven. But the one thing that really stuck out to me to this day was that they put it in the paper, so I guess that makes it true, right? They said, we're going to have this high school tournament, and we're going to have girls basketball is going to be a fall sport, which it was a fall sport in the state of Michigan up until less than 10 years ago. Approximately 8-10 years ago, somebody filed a lawsuit and won. And their rationale was exactly, you know what I'm going to say, we need to keep the girls out of the way of the boys. That was the rationale. So I guess they never heard of volleyball, because then that came along, and then that was in the winter. So anyway, and yeah, we stayed out of their way. But I can tell you that as I talk about this is history. And I'm going to tell you right now, I don't look back on my long life, which I've qualified for Medicare now, if you want to figure out how old I am. I don't think I'm that old. I wouldn't change a thing, but I wouldn't do it again. And I don't want anybody here to do it again, all right? So I got to go to college. My whole dream was to go to Michigan State. I grew up riding my bike to their campus. I lived at home my first 3 years in the basement of my mom's house, who my mom was over me at this point, because we didn't get scholarships. I went there because they had one of the better sport programs in the state. All right? I'll tell you who the powers in the state in women's athletics were in 1975, 76. It was Michigan State, Western Michigan, and Grand Valley. They had some really strong female leadership there. And when we went to play, those were the teams that made it to like postseason. We had the College World Series. And my freshman year in 1976, this should be on your test, Michigan State University won the AIW National Championship. We all got on a bus, and we bused to Omaha and stayed there for a long time. It poured rain. We were playing at Dill Field, which was a little bit like Betts Park or L. Bell Field. And it rained for a couple days, so we ended up playing the finals on the UNO football field. And I remember scoring in that game, rounding third and sliding about 90 feet. Well, it's only 60 feet. And there was like a wake of water behind me. But that's how we won the tournament. We were 5-0. So Michigan State was really the first team east of the Mississippi to win the national championship. But this is the thing, and it still pisses me off. We're not in any record books. AIW, they don't count us. They've dismissed our championship. Now, I can tell you, in 1995, Michigan State brought us all back 19 years later and gave us all a national championship ring. They also, in 2001, brought us back and said, you can get a letter jacket, you have to buy it. So I was like, I'm not buying it. I earned it, just like Irvin Johnson. But that was still in 2001. That was their way of making some amends. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But one of the quips in the story of the times is in this story. It's one of my favorite stories. Audrey's heard it about 10 times. You want to tell it?
No. Don't want to stay here.
That's true. So I was, we were playing a rare doubleheader when I was a freshman. So it was 1976. And we were going to play a doubleheader with our men's basketball team. Okay? And so we got to practice in Jennison Fieldhouse, which is what they had, and they didn't have Breslin at that point. We never got to practice in there. We didn't step foot in there. We practiced in the women's IM. We practiced on third floor of Jennison Fieldhouse, which is where the gymnastics team had practice. I love gymnastics. What a sport. But you ever been in a gym with the gymnasts? Chalk everywhere. We'd run around. We'd slide on the court because there was chalk dust. It would stick to me all over because I'm a big sweater. And so we had drips on our floor. We knew where to not dribble because where we played, there was drips on the floor. We shared a locker room with all the people who would come in the IM building to take swimming classes. We were in the locker room in a corner. Our coach is giving us a halftime pep talk, and here comes all these people with their towels and shower caps through our meetings. I mean, you can't make this up. So we're excited now. We're going to play in this doubleheader. We're going to be the second event. And we're practicing on a Saturday morning. We'd been told to be there for practice. And we're just warming up, shooting around, layups and so forth. And in walks the opponent for the men the following day. And I just looked, I'm like, we're not on the building schedule, I bet. So our coach came over, and our coach, by the way, his name was Dominic. Dominic's previous employment the year before a number of years before. He had been the manager for the men's basketball team, the equipment manager. And when they had the coach who'd been coaching their team for probably nothing, left, they hired Dominic to be our coach, the equipment manager. I mean, he knew some things about basketball, but I will say, you know, coaching is definitely a long process. And so he walked over to us and said, girls, we got to go upstairs. And we were like, no, we're not going upstairs. We balked. We were like, I mean, it was important to us, right? And so I see him talking to the opposing coach, who's a Hall of Fame legend, well known to this day. And here he comes walking over to us. So we gather up, and I always say if we had today's, we'd have our phones, we'd have selfies, we'd be all excited. We thought he was going to give us a pep talk. And this was his pep talk. To this day, I'll never forget it. He said, girls, you need to get off the court because nobody gives a damn about women's basketball. And I was always a pretty happy-go-lucky kid, happy for the opportunity, but I was pissed because I care. I said, my mom cares. I'm still pissed. And as I said, I'm going to tweet at that guy. He's still alive. So people always ask me, well, who was it? They want to know. I used to out him. I'm like, why? It could have been anybody. It could have been anybody. And to be honest, to this day and age, it could still be a lot of people. If you ever go on Twitter and some of the things that are out there, and there's a lot of mean people out there. If you're an athlete or you're anybody, don't go on that Twitter. Don't look at the chats. That's where all the stupid people live. Don't be one of them. Stupid people know a lot. That's where they live. The shit they say is out of line. But anyway, nobody cares about women's basketball. I got news for you. That's not true. Just because you don't care about something doesn't mean everybody else doesn't care about it. Okay? Even John Wooden used to say it's the best game around. Right? So anyway, our journey was basically by the time I was a senior, and now Title IX is starting to become, it's a hot button. All right? And this is the thing. It's a federal regulation. You know what the compliance for not, the penalty for not complying? Anybody here know what the penalty for not complying is? Withhold federal funding. So at some point, athletic directors and athletic departments are feeling the heat. They're feeling the heat because, I mean, the presidents are like, what's going on down there? Oh, we're giving them a chance. They started having more women's teams. Now they had them, and I can only tell you the only word I can use is reluctant. They were like having them, but they didn't really want to spend too much money on them. And so the experiences we had at Michigan State, we probably had 2 scholarships for all of our basketball team, and that would be split up into, you know. My sophomore year, I got a call in the summer from our softball coach. You're going to get a scholarship. I go, you're kidding. $300. $100 a term. We had 3 terms. And I told my mom, I said, they're going to pay us to do that. She goes, where are you going to get the rest of the money? I'm like, I don't know. I never worried about that. You know, I learned about financial aid back then. But it was a very reluctant time, and yet you saw lawsuits brewing around the country. And by my senior year, a number of my colleagues on the basketball team and some of my former players who had played and graduated the year before me, they came to me, I was the team captain, and said, what do you think about driving down to Ann Arbor with us? I said, where's that? And they said, we're going to meet with this woman named Jean King, and she is a Title IX lawyer. And we're going to go talk to her. And they'd had this brewing before it got to me. I said, I'm in. Let's go. We came down and we sat in her living room for a few hours, and she asked us all these questions. I'm like, what? She doesn't know anything about basketball. She didn't ask anything about basketball. She kept asking about our accommodations, like when you go on the road. We're like, well, we go on a road. We always take cars because our coaches drive us in the cars. They put us in the station wagons, and they drive us in this kind of weather to play basketball at Purdue and wherever we go. Well, what kind of food money do you get? Well, we eat at McDonald's about 3 times a day. We get $5 a day, which back then, you know, is still it wasn't what Irvin Johnson got. And then they asked us about our accommodations when we in hotels. Well, we sleep 4 or more to a room, try to save. Everything was about not spending money. Those are what she asked us about. We went to court in 1979. It happens to be called Hutchins versus MSU Board of Trustees. I'm not the brainchild. I'm just the flag carrier. And we won that case in about an hour. Restraining order against Michigan State to treat women's basketball better. It didn't necessarily apply to all the sports, as we found out, but it was a landmark case, and there was a lot of those going on. And as that went into the 80s, I can tell you I made my way a couple stops, and ended up here in 1982.
Hutch, real quick, why was it decided in an hour?
Because it was so fucking evident.
Because of the money, that it was so crystal
It was so,
clear.
she pointed out, she goes, this is what we're going to do, you guys. There's all these things, the gym, the gym times, all these things, but these are something that a judge who's a white male can look at and say, wow. It was evident.
Gavel, done.
So data matters. And so when we came back, we immediately started getting charter buses. We immediately started sleeping 2 to a room and those kind of things. But we did, so I left Michigan State, greatest experience of my life, be a college athlete. I wasn't walking around pissed off all the time. But we all knew this. We knew that we were worth less. We knew we were second-class citizens. We knew it. To be honest, back in the 60s and 70s, it was kind of like, actually, I even thought it was normal. Well, I'm just a girl. How'd I get so lucky to be a girl? I want to be a boy. I want to get to play sports. That was the way it was. But this is how change happened. It doesn't happen quietly, or it doesn't happen seamlessly. It became a lot of fights in athletic departments as they had to start putting in more resources, and they started coming up with, how can we evaluate this law? They came up with the prongs of Title IX, which one of them were just participation. The participation of women on your campus had to meet the participation of the student body. So if 52% of your student body is women, 52% of your athletes have to be women. That was one of the prongs. And so they have a few others. And, lawyers all get in the room. Now we've got to figure out how to define what's equal or equitable. We have to define it. I'm like, just look in the dictionary. Isn't that what it's for? But I knew I always wanted to be a coach. And it was largely because I'd been so impacted by, I had a really strong high school basketball coach who, through my parents' divorce, kept me on the straight and narrow because I wasn't. And then I had a really strong summer softball coach. And we didn't have youth leagues. We didn't have 10 and under, 14 and under, all that stuff. We had ball. We had women's softball. I played on a women's team when I was 16. And all my teammates were in their 20s, in their 30s. Our player coach, who was a Hall of Fame legend, was 49 when I got on that team. And she was always yelling at me, get to the base, Hutch, get to the base. And they impacted me so greatly because that's what coaches get to do. I mean, teachers and coaches are here to impact your life, and you impact ours. But I ended up here, and I came here in 82, fall of 82. Michigan softball had been coached, and it started in 78, which was when I was in college. And I can only tell you this. We didn't even consider Michigan a foe in pretty much anything, in women's softball and in women's sport. Now, they had Diane Dietz, there's a Hall of Honor person for you, who was a fantastic player, her and her twin sister. I don't know if she was a twin. And they had some good teams, but Michigan was definitely the dormant of the Big Ten. Doormat and dormant. Okay? Let me see if I think this is my next clip. All right.
We have pushed our way into the centers of business, of science, of government, of politics because of our newly achieved collective strength.
Today, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare issued new guidelines calling for proportional spending of men's and women's sports that could pour millions of dollars into women's programs.
It jeopardizes all of men's intercollegiate athletics, but that doesn't mean it's wrong.
Don Canham is very famous around here and is the reason we have the big house and make the kind of money we do, but he actually went to Congress and lobbied against Title IX and said that it would ruin college football. I don't think that's happening. All right. This is a letter. I don't know if you can really see it. Can you see that? What it says? The gist of it is we are now faced with the possibility of the same football M, block M, being earned by the women's synchronized swimming team, for instance. If that comes to pass, it will minimize the value of the M in the eyes of not only our players, but the public who place such a high value on it. Women were lobbying to get a letter jacket because we had women athletics. Okay, it's 1975. We had just started having quote-unquote varsity athletes, and a number of them said, well, we should get a letter jacket. And our football coach, our athletic director, and our basketball coach all said, there's no way the women are going to wear the same thing as the men. He did say, to his credit, and Bo became a huge advocate and a staunch supporter of the women athletes once he really got out of football and became our athletic director, and then got a chance to observe how awesome it can be. But he said, I first feel that women should have an equal award. I believe you should spend the same amount of money, but I'm absolutely opposed, and my staff is opposed to an identical award. And again, this is kind of the times. This is the way it was. It's history. All right? So when I got here, I came for $3,000. I just finished my master's degree, and I always loved to famously call out my mother, who said, well, I thought you were going to get a real job. I said, oh, I got a chance to go to Michigan and coach. And I worked at what's now the M-Dents, Dining Gates. I worked at the Wiffle Tree, which was a great restaurant back in the 80s. Nicest one in town. Bill Frieda, the basketball coach, got me a job there. I've never worked harder in my life than in the restaurant business. And he got me a job there because that's where the basketball boys had their training table. I can assure you there was no training table for any of the female athletes until, I would say, the year of 2017. Could be 16, but I think it was 17. That the women got included in meals. All right. And so I was here 2 years as the assistant for Bob DeCarolis. Bob had worked in the business office. He was an athletic administrator. He had taken over because when he got here, Gloria Solik was the first softball coach. Gloria was actually the women's basketball coach in that first Team 1 era. And when they added softball in 1978, they said, Gloria, you have to coach softball too. Gloria didn't, first of all, she didn't like being outside in the cold. And second of all, she didn't know softball. She'd never played it. She didn't have anything to do with softball. So she was lucky because after a couple years, Bob DeCarolis, who was in our community and played in the men's fast pitch league, came out and started helping, and he became the head coach. But he was really a full-time administrator. And when I came along, he said, our goal is to make this full-time, and I'd really like to see somebody like you. I'd like to see a female become the coach. So in 1984, I was named the head coach. I couldn't have been more excited. And my people at Michigan State, if you're wondering, were like, what the hell are you doing? I said, this is an awesome opportunity. I got my appointment sheet. I used to put it up here, but it's got my social number on it. I don't know how to redact it. My appointment was, well, I did meet with Don Canham. Actually, I had to go have an interview. And I don't think he ever looked at me. I dressed up as good as I can, and the only skirt I had and the only blazer I had, and now that I think about it, didn't even match. But it didn't matter because he didn't even look at me. He asked me one question. He asked two questions. One, he said, are you ready? I lied and said yes. I was 25 years old, 26. And he said, well, can you type? I lied again and said, yeah. I always thought that was odd, but, he was kind of he was really known for being sexist. Anyway, I become, on September 1st, I go in to my new office in the Hartwig building, which is still there. And I get called in by Phyllis Oker, who was the women's athletic director at the time. She worked for Don Canham. And she said, this is the thing. My appointment sheet said 50% athletics, 50% clerk typist. I thought, well, I wonder what that means. Well, I found out that day it meant I'm the secretary to Phyllis from 8 to noon every day. That was my job every day. And then I could be free to go about my softball business. Even if I was on a recruiting trip, even if I was tied up all weekend doing softball, I had to be in at 8 a.m. Monday morning to do this job. I will tell you, I was really bad at it. If you want to get out of a job, be really bad at it. The problem is you can get fired. All right? But, and we were 10-month. We only got paid for 10 months. So our benefits were affected. I mean, eating in the summer was affected. Paying my rent in the summer was affected. But, you know, I was pretty excited to get to play, get to be the coach. Just so you know, there were a number of women coaches hired that year because the president of the university had said, we've got to do something. We are at risk. So they added a bunch of full-time women coaches. Our gymnastics coach, I remember everybody's name now, Dana Kempthorne. She was the gymnast coach, but she worked her 8 hours a day, or 4 hours a day was in the ticket office. Bitsy Ritt, who was a longtime administrator for us, she was our tennis coach. She'd been hired in. Her job was to do all of the travel for the women's sport teams. So I would call Bitsy and say, and she's on the tennis court coaching, I'd say, get me Bitsy. I said, Bitsy, where's my bus? Oh, I don't know, let me look on the schedule. She'd leave her practice to help us get our stuff. And so the field hockey coach's job was to be the equipment manager. She sat in the cage several hours a day, and kids that would come in and get their women's athletic shirt. Because our practice gear was one sweatshirt, women's athletics with a block M. One t-shirt, one pair of sweats, one shorts. It also women's athletics. I guess they didn't know we were women. That was it. All right. The interesting part of that was that particular year we did hire 2 men to be full-time coaches for the women. Jim Richardson was our swimming coach for many years, fantastic coach. And then Bud Vandaway became our women's basketball coach. They were 12-month full-time appointments. They didn't have any other duties. And it was just a couple years ago, James Henry was our track coach for as long as I was here. He retired last June. And I asked him a couple years ago, I said, James, did you have any other jobs? He goes, no, I was just 50%. He didn't even get an opportunity to make some additional monies. And I will point out, James was a black male. So we weren't just sexist, we were racist. That's just my opinion. So it was quite an era for us because we were having softball games, and I'm a coach. I bring players to the university. We want to be great. We want to be great for Michigan. We want to win games. We want to win championships. I believed in that, and I believed that we could do that. But I talk about every day I would walk out onto our field, which is where it is now, Alumni Field. We didn't have a fence. We shared the outfield with field hockey. So when they had home games, we couldn't have practice on those fall days, which we practice in the fall. We'd have to go somewhere else, go to Elbel or something. I didn't have full-time, I wasn't full-time, so I didn't have an assistant. My assistant worked full-time and showed up in time for practice. Meanwhile, baseball, I'd walk across the way, I'd watch them. They'd have 3 full-time coaches. They've got the entire grounds crew out there getting their field ready, where I would be, can I borrow your tractor? You got to drag the field. You got to line the field. We didn't have any water out there. The field would be cement. All right. And we didn't have bathrooms. We didn't have a locker room. We didn't even have a storage area. All right. We'd put stuff in the back of Booster Bound. We'd get in trouble all the time because it was in the electrical room that they finally locked us out of. Okay. That was where we put our shit. And so every day, the biggest fight I said my first, 5, 6, 7 years was just trying to put a practice on the field. And I did an interview with Dave Revson last fall. And I was telling him this story, and most people are like amazed by it. I don't know. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. And he said, well, how does a young coach like you at the time hone your craft? And how do you study and get better? And how do you work on, your skill sets? I looked at him, I said, you don't. We would get to practice time, like, what are we going to do? Because it took me all day to get ready for practice. So this is how it was, very slow. And it wasn't until we got into the 90s. And we had hired a women's volleyball coach. Jack Weidenbach he went from Bo's right-hand man as athletic director. As you know, Bo was only here 1 year. And then Jack was here for a number of years. And he understood that the women needed better. And he got us into full-time, so I didn't have to do these other stupid jobs, and gave us a full 12-month salary. And he told me later, Don Cannon was like, that's dumb. You shouldn't do that. I'll give them a little. They're going to want more. Then we're going to want more pay. And but he took better care of us. He hired Peggy Bradley-Dappas as a volleyball coach. And after 2 years, Peggy was moved into the at the role that had been Phyllis Oakers. She was now, we call it the SWA. I call it the Single Woman Administrator. The NCAA used to have a rule to make sure there was at least one woman on the staff in an administration, and it was called the Senior Women's Administrator, because so many programs had none. And it's only guys making decisions on us. So Peggy became the SWA, and I'll tell you what, she was given some support to support us. We started winning because we started having the resources. We started having a budget, because I don't know if I mentioned, we raised half of our travel budget by cleaning Chrysler Arena after concerts, by selling football, basketball, and hockey programs at all the home events. And in general, my very first year with Bob was really innovative. He was a DJ on the side. Okay, that's what he did on Saturday nights. He goes, this is how we're going to make money. We're going to have a beer and pizza party. I'm like, really? Cool. This is how we did it. We used a building that was the VFW something or other right by the football stadium. He got all the beer donated. All of our student athletes got Budweiser red t-shirts, and they served the beer and the pizza that we got donated to all these people that paid to come to this event. Can you imagine if I said, let's have a beer and pizza night and let's have Audrey and her buddies serve it? I mean, and that's how we did things. We were just surviving. So Peggy came along, we got scholarship money. We got recruiting money. Our kids finally had an academic advisor. We only had one for all the women, but we had one. So we had one advisor for all of us. All right? And we just plugged away. That's how it rolled. And really, that was the beginning of Michigan was the doormat of the Big Ten in women's sports. And then by the time we got into the early and mid-90s and things started clicking, we now blow away the rest of the conference in conference championships. I mean, Bev Plotke herself has won like 29. All right? We have more in softball than all the other Big Ten schools combined. We've blown them away because that's what Michigan should be, at the forefront. When we say leaders and best, we don't mean we're okay being average or we're okay being okay. It means we're going to be the best at everything we do. All right.
Which women and girls are entitled under current law. For these reasons, Donna and I feel we must submit this minority report. We want the President, the Secretary of Education, Congress, and the public to understand the findings and recommendations that we believe the Commission should have made to truly make athletics open to all.
Essentially, it was blaming women's sports for the loss of these men's sports. And all along, Title IX has never done that. It's never said you have to get rid of men's sports. It's just saying create more space at the table.
So as I talk about some of the turmoil that we go through when there's major change, athletic departments said they couldn't afford both. And what they did was they started cutting opportunities for the men. Wrestling got hit terribly. A lot of programs got dropped. We actually dropped men's gymnastics for a period of time. And the men were mad. And you know who they were mad at? The women. And as we said, we never wanted to take away your opportunity. I just wanted the same one. That's all we want, just the same opportunity. All right? And so she was part of a commission. Her and Donna DeVerona, I believe, will be on next. That's not it. Anyway, well, I'll just move to this slide. So I got asked recently by a donor to the university. He said, we were talking Title IX in this story, and he goes, this is really interesting. You should do a book. Oh, we will. Hopefully John Bacon will help. All right. He said, did it do what you wanted it to do? I thought, well, first of all, I didn't have anything to do with it. And second of all, I think it did for society. It changed society. It changed the world of women and women's ability to be a part of society, whether it's on the athletic fields, all right? And it talks about 80% of female managers or CEOs, which were still very underrepresented in the corporate level, but have played sport at some time. We are now 50% of law school admissions. When RBG, everybody knows who that is, right? When she went to law school, there were 5 women in her class. And they all, if you saw the movie, and if you didn't, I recommend it. All the women in her class got invited to the president's house or the dean of law school or some big guy like that. And he sat at the table and asked him why you would take this spot and take it away from men. That's in the movie, makes it true. She writes about it though. All right. So now it's really common that women play sports. We all don't think anything of it. In fact, it's cool to be an athlete. When I was an athlete, I was called a tomboy and people thought I was weird. All right. I had a few good friends. Now we have over 200,000 NCAA athletes, and we see that faculty are now women. We're definitely represented. And we find that 45% of women are in the STEM fields, but only 25% are in the workforce. So I just thought that was interesting. Not sure what to make of it. You guys can talk about that sometime. But this legislation, sports is just a small part of it. College faculty. We make up the majority of non-tenure track lecturers and instructors, but I asked Professor Dooley one day, what does that mean? What does that mean? Non-tenure track.
Don't make a lot of money, I think. Not the same level of benefits, part-time. Yeah. Women are very represented, but they're still not quite there in some areas. So 44% of tenure track, 36% of full professors. Only 30% of women are college presidents, although more than 50% of women are heads of departments, which people head up a department because that's part of the ladder that you climb to probably get to the next highest level, right? So as we go up the glass ceiling, so to speak, we still run into, as we get to the top of the mountain, I was telling Audrey earlier, you get to, everything you climb a mountain, when you get up to the top, close to 14,000, you go really slow, it's steep, and it's hard. But we're paid less than men in everything. Women still make arguably 20% less than men across the workforce. Doesn't really matter what you're in, all right? And in our sports, women coaches, which has been another of my passions, less than 42% of women coach women, are head coaches in college athletics today. This is Division I. I don't have all the data for everybody, all right? That means that we're really less than 25% of the overall population of leadership positions, okay? The Big Ten does better than most, but it's really common. I was watching somebody talk about Texas. Texas is a pretty big school, right? They have 2 women head coaches in their department. Everybody else is male. And the pay gaps is larger than any industry, as a lawyer friend of mine defined, because it's defined by gender. Out of the 300 plus Division I institutions, only 6 women are athletic directors. So I think there's still room for us to be involved.
Where the top 9 players on the women's national team are in a dispute with the U.S. Federation over bonus money. And that means right now, players such as Mia Hamm, Michelle Akers, Carla Overbeck, and Brianna Scurry are not on the national team as it begins to prepare for the Olympics.
We decided going into the 96 Olympic Games, we had the most leverage that we thought we could possibly get, and that we were going to make a stand, because we were just fighting for things that, if you think about it, seem so obvious, but they weren't obvious back then.
You say you're so proud of us, but this isn't how you treat the best team in the world. And so being able to walk away, even not knowing what the heck I was gonna do when I walked out that door, I'd be okay. Title IX gave me that confidence because I had an education. I had my college degree.
And our whole fight was like, hey, look, we're not asking for millions. Back then, we weren't asking for equal pay as they are today, which I think is the right call. We were asking for equitable pay. Like, this isn't fair.
Let's continue this.
But eventually, we were able to put it into a contract, which then meant that U.S. Soccer had to market us because they had to pay us. So they had to water the garden to try and get it to bloom. Right? And that's what we kept saying. If you just invest and tell people we're here, Like, give it a chance. And when they did, look what happened.
Well, a couple things here. First of all, women's soccer in 2022, which was just a couple months ago, won a lawsuit that they had been fighting for years, since '96. They were outdrawing, they were outwinning the men's national team in everything. Yet they were paid less. And I can only ask you one question. Why? Why? And I don't know I can only think of one answer. But people often say, well, the men make more money. Some of the things that you'll find is that the investment on the front end needs to happen. And it's part of what Title IX takes a look at is when we say, well, the women don't make any money and they don't draw crowds, well, what are we paying in the dollars to get them out there and make money? And when you are all familiar, or maybe not, with the basketball tournament 2 years ago, when they all went to the bubbles, the men had this weight room that was the entire ballroom, which, ballrooms are split up into, dividers. The whole ballroom was weights because for 3 weeks, somebody needs to be in there. They still lift. They got to maintain. The women had a yoga mat and a couple barbells from the shitty hotel. It was worse than it wasn't even a good hotel. And somebody thought that was okay. That'll be fine. That's all they need. And then when it became a thing, because it got on social media, and if you really want to bitch about something, just put it out there with proof on social media, and the NCAA will react. All right? And so the disparities that we still see as of last year, this is as of last year's, $10 million are spent more on the men's baseball tournament than the softball tournament. Even though we played the exact format, they, until last year, would get 11 days in their finals to play their games. With the same number of games that we play, we had 6. And I can think of how many times we played a game. And in '05, when we won it, we got walked off on in the if game to get to the championship game. It wasn't the if game. It was the first game. We were in the winner's bracket at 2 a.m. So now we have to play another game to get to the championship series. 3-game series for the championship after you go through the tournament. We had to play at noon. We got off field at 2 a.m. We had to play at noon. Then we won. We're in the championship series. We played that game at 7 p.m. at night, that night. That was common. It's common. We do that shit all the time. It's nuts. And so it wasn't until it was aired on TV, there was everybody talking about it. Now we get 9 days. So we're moving in that direction. But the difference is spent on the men's hockey tournament and the women's hockey tournament, between men's lacrosse and women's lacrosse. Across the board, men are still getting $133 million more dollars in scholarship dollars. $133 million, that's a lot of money. All right? Women across the board make up 54% of colleges in the country. 54%. We receive 36% of operating dollars, 42% of scholarship dollars, and 32% of recruiting dollars. And this is, of course, a lot of Power 5. I was down at a D3 school, and boy, they all have to fight for what they get. So the one thing that they take a look and they say, well, the men generate more revenue, but they found with this women's basketball tournament, they did a study, and it was largely based on women's basketball, that the way they've skewed the system, the monies that the women could make, the women's tournament could be worth up to $80 million based on whatever they figure that out. $80 million is what a company came back with. But the rights are all sold in a package that's packaged out with a bunch of other stuff. We literally deny them the opportunity to make the money to exist and say, well, you don't make money and there's no interest. The interest has never been higher. College softball is like the third-rated sport on ESPN. And at our own school, I mean, we were third in hits behind football, basketball, and then softball on, however they figure out what's on the internet, Go Blue. Women's sports are wildly popular. They're very popular on TV. There's money making to be had. And keep in mind, this is Team 46 in softball. In baseball, I believe they're getting close to Team 160. Football's like 150. I mean, 100 plus years of, being at the start line. So, where are we at? We're great. If you've ever been to Alumni Field, I suggest you come out. We're supposed to play Wednesday. If you could bring a shovel, that'd be great. But are we there? We're still evolving. To me, it's an evolution, generation after generation. So that's all I got for now. I hope that gives you a lot of food to think about. You're probably thinking about lunch, actually. But I appreciate your attention, and I'm happy for questions or if people want to stay after and, you know.
First off, can we get a huge round of applause and gratitude for Coach? Coach, I do have one thing about the future. The notion of a women's athletic director, I think people can wrap their head around, but you brought up something last time when we spoke one time. There's men coaching most women's teams right now. How many women are coaching men's teams? And I bet that makes some people's brain freeze for a second. But why? Why couldn't Kim coach the men's team? But we don't see that ever.
I will tell you that when we were going to hire a basketball coach a few years ago, and one of the prominent administrators came to me and said, we're going to get the best basketball coach we can get for the men. This is the men's job that was open. And this is when Pat Summitt was alive and well and thriving. And I looked and I said, are we going to interview Pat Summitt? And you know what they did? They laughed. That's funny. So I don't know why. You're a guy. You tell me. I don't know.
Almost out of time. No, I do think, though, that is something that has to change. It has to change. And the athletic director gap is actually startling given the number of teams right now.
Well, and it's true across society that as you move higher up the corporate ladders and higher up the echelons of the systems, you know, we're still climbing the mountain.
We got time for a couple quick questions.
Anybody?
Don't be shy. He's got something for Hutch.
I know, I'm very intimidating. Ask my players.
Anything, guys?
What are things that anyone on an individual level can do to help create and continue the change that has been and will continue to be?
What can all of us ordinary people do to help? You know what? I think it's hopeful, as I've spoken quite a bit on this year with this presentation. I actually fixed it up since last semester and added some film and some other histories that people don't know about, like getting fired for being pregnant. But I think it hopefully just gives you a different lens. Even women who are athletes, and I get called all the time because I'm this Title IX expert now. I don't know the law. Like, I'm not a lawyer. I know enough about it. And they're like, well, the boys are getting like all new batting cages, and they're just telling us, you know, we don't have any money. And hopefully the student athletes walk by that and recognize, because for years, men's basketball they'd build a really nice locker room, and the women had crap. And every day, this women athletes would walk by that and recognize that they weren't thought as highly of by the athletic department. And so just having a lens for what is right. And one of the tenets of our program here at Michigan in softball is to leave the program better. However you do that, it's not always equated to just wins and championships, but to leave it better. And I believe that's because our job is to leave the world better. That's your job. That's your generation, to stand up for what's right, because this is the most interesting thing that people say to me. I'm always like astounded. They're like, well, now, you know, I've got daughters. And then they got up to be that age where they could play sports. And all of a sudden the dad's now interested. I go, well, didn't you have a mom? Didn't you have a sister? Like, why do you have to qualify? How about it's just the right thing? Because if it matters for your son, it matters for your daughter. Women matter just as much as men. And don't let anybody out there with that, oh, nobody cares about the women's sports. That's bullshit. We didn't get where we are because nobody cares. Because once they gave us opportunity, because I don't know if I was the best coach ever. I can tell you this, I had an opportunity to get to be one. You don't get to do what you do in life just because you're so freaking good. You get to do it if there's an opportunity for you to do it. And that's what this law created. And I can tell you the most important thing, people have asked me, what's the most important thing that ever happened in women's athletics? Besides Title IX. Nothing. We're nothing without the law. Don't ever let people tell you we're okay now. We're good. We're doing great. We're on our way. But as we look at all the things and the disparities, women just deserve the same as you guys. That's all.
One more time for Hutch.
Okay.
All right. We'll see everybody here Wednesday.
Good luck on the test.
Yeah,
Good luck walking out the door.
You know I'm going to put that stuff in the test now that Hutch said it, so it'll be
That'd be great.
Thank you so much. Awesome.
I didn't do so good on tests.
I like your updates too. They're great. It's
I got a couple more I need to add. I just thought of it.
If you want to put that